All right, so welcome to the weekly roundup. Weinberg's class, he's very busy at the moment, so maybe we'll have it later today, or we'll have it maybe tomorrow. We'll see. If I bother him enough, he'll make a class. Anyway, he's right here. What are we talking about? We got this week's parsha is Emor. Emor has a anytime my daughter and I do psukim, we read psukim together. We have passages from the Torah, and she sees a word twice. She always points out the Torah never has unnecessary words. The Torah never says anything twice. So, of course, there's always an explanation, but the opening passage of this week's parsha has a redundancy, seemingly. It says, Daber el Aaron, Hashem says, speak to Aaron, says to Moshe, speak to Aaron, V'albanav, and to his children, V'eskol b'nei Yisrael, and to all the Jewish people, V'amarta alehem, and say to them. So speak to Aaron and say to them, and speak to him. Yeah, speak to them and say to them. So what do you mean? Just tell me once. Should I speak to them or say to them? So Rashi explains that the reason why it says it twice is, well, there's multiple reasons, but one of the most obvious ones, or the one that Rashi gives down, is that you also will speak to the children. That whatever I tell you, and in this case, we're talking about the laws of the Kohanim. This parsha mainly deals with the laws of the Kohanim, especially in the beginning. Don't just teach the big Kohanim, yeah, the fathers. You also got to teach the children. They got to be ready. They got to know what to do when it comes time to do the service. The name for small Kohanim, by the way, interesting. Well, the one that there's a few names, but one of those Pirchei Kuhuna. Pirchei literally means the flowers, the buddings, the budding Kohanim. And why? Because their beards are starting to sprout. Always like the Kohenets. Yeah, no, there's no Kohenets. The Kohenets. If you guys want to know, interestingly enough, one of the explanations, how do people know if they're from the tribe of Levi? If they're a Kohen or a Levi? Now, we don't know for sure. And the people, just because, and we actually have it often. I've had two friends that thought they were Kohanim, and they would bless the Jewish people on holidays and festivals, only to find out, a little bit later a little bit later in their life, when they talk to their father again about being a Kohen or Levi, the father will say, "We're not a Kohen or a Levi." They'll be like, "What are you talking about? You said you were." "I never said that." That's happened twice. So not everybody who says they're a Kohen means they're a Kohen or a Levi, but for the most part, you can safely assume they are. And why? How come we don't know which tribe we're from, but they know which tribe they're from? Right? Kohens and Levis come from the tribe of Levi. And the simple answer is they're very proud of their lineage. And so therefore they would tell their children, by the way, even though they stopped, even once the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed and they were traveling around, don't forget, we know that we're from the tribe of Levi. Why? We're the ones that serve in the Beis Hamikdash, from the Mishkan, whatever, yeah, the Beis Hamikdash. And there's a certain holiness to you, and they were very proud of that lineage, and therefore it got passed on. Anybody? So here's some last names that'll let you know if they're a Levi or not. You have Levi. I think Segel. Anybody with the last name Segel? Who else? For a Kohen, it's Kohen, obviously. Katz, Lowy, Katzmin. There's another one. There's a good one. Kaplan. No, Kaplan is also a Levi. Oh, Kagan, maybe, fine. But Kaplan is usually a Levi, or what I found. Yeah, for sure. Don't argue with me. Weinberg is Weinberg. Weinberg happens to be a Levi, but I don't know if he. There's another one. There's a very good one, but I forgot. So they would keep their names.
What about Cohen?
Yeah, Cohen is lame. Wait a second. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'll tell you in a second. Oh, okay, so Rabbi Weinberg's telling me that you'll see, I don't know which gravestones where, in Europe maybe? You'll see in gravestones in New York that a Kohen, if a person is a Kohen, you'll see on the gravestone, they'll have hands like this engraved onto the gravestone. And for a Levi, they'll have, like, I guess, pouring a cup, right? Because that's their service. Kohanim are not allowed to become ritually impure. Clearly written in the Torah, even till today. They can't put themselves in a situation where they become ritually impure. And what happens if they become ritually impure? You can't serve in the Beis Hamikdash. Can't eat truma. So what do they do? What if they have a family member that passes away? So there are 6, right? 6: wife, husband, mother, father, son and daughter, sister and brother. So 7. There are 7. Only 7 times they can become go to a cemetery. We unfortunately in our community we had somebody, a Kohen, whose wife passed away, and during their speech, the son spoke, and he goes, "This is the first." He's 30, and he goes, "This is the first time I've ever been to a funeral." They're not allowed to become tumas mace, as we call it. Especially, they can't become ritually impure. Especially that level of impurity, unless there's no one else to bury the body. Even the Kohen Gadol, a high priest, who's never allowed to leave the Beis Hamikdash. Do you guys know that? It's not a great gig to be the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. But he's never allowed to leave the only time he'll be able to leave the Beis Hamikdash, and the only time a Kohen is allowed to defile themselves if it's for their own family member, unless there's nobody else that can bury them. That's why if you go to a cemetery, Kohanim are buried on the outside, usually on the boundaries of the cemetery, so easy access. They don't have to walk through any other bodies to get there. And so there's some very practical applications of this, and I know we've spoken about it in the past. Very El. So like this. The way Tuma works, ritual impurity, which makes no sense, right? It's a chok. We don't understand ritual impurity. But ritual impurity, when something is impure, the impurity goes straight up, and it continues on to heaven, so to speak, unless it's enclosed in an ohel, and it has to be a certain distance. The roof has to be a certain distance from the body itself. But according to, so like this, let me tell you something interesting. El Al flights, when they fly anywhere, when they fly into Israel, their route always avoids cemeteries, so that they never have to, a Kohen who comes on the flight doesn't have to worry about going over a dead body, so to speak. But what about, what about if when they transfer bodies to Israel, so the bodies you don't even know. Most of the time, I think it's very often, very common, that in storage underneath the plane, they're carrying a coffin. They're bringing somebody to be buried. So it's a bit problematic for a Kohen, but I guess most poskim agree that it's not a problem. Even though there are opinions that say a moving ohel, a moving roof, is not considered a proper roof, and therefore it would be a problem. But I get most authorities hold it's not a problem, and the reason is because the distance between the body and the top of where the body is being stored, the tuma is being able to be enclosed. The ritual impurity is able to be enclosed. There's a very famous picture, I don't know if you guys saw, of a guy on an Air Canada flight who was he wrapped himself up into it was a big chilul Hashem, actually, because we don't do this, but he wrapped himself up in a plastic, you guys saw this, so that in case there was a dead body underneath they were carrying a corpse to Israel. Whatever, if you guys see it, I'll show you later. Anyway, so one of the things they can't do, one time, Rabbi Schneur just walked in, a couple of things that a Kohen can't do. One time, Rabbi Schneur and I went to go visit somebody in a hospital. It's the first time I guess I'd ever walked with a Kohen. I don't know if you know, Schneur and Rabbi Silverberg are Kohanim. We went to go visit someone in the hospital. When we go and we walk in, we meet the person, and Schneur stayed for 2 minutes. And he said, "Okay, now I have to leave." And I was thinking, why do you have to? That's kind of rude. Why do you have to leave? But I didn't know that Kohanim are not allowed to hang around hospitals for too long. That was the first time I ever realized that. In case somebody passes away, they're not allowed to be around. They can't purposely put themselves in a situation where they could potentially become ritually impure. So I didn't know that. Whatever, it was fine. He stood outside, waited for me to come out. I stayed extra long, like another 40 minutes, so that he would suffer in the cold. Now, I'll tell you a little Kabbalistically, the idea, a Kohen is all about chesed and all about giving. Yeah, they're the ones, and because they're connected with chesed, with kindness, they're the ones, like we spoke about in a few parshiyos ago, in Metzora, Tazria, Metzora, that they are the ones that are, if a person has tsaras, they're the ones that say they have tsaras. Yeah, I could be an expert in tsaras and be able to figure out what a white blotch looks like. But I can't actually declare anybody to be a Mitzayra, someone who is ritually impure to that extent. It has to come from a Kohen. And we explained, according to Kabbalah, it's because they come from, whenever you're going to admonish somebody, it has to come from a place of chesed. Yeah, they're going to kick these people out of the camp. They're going to remove these people from the community. Once you tell somebody they have tsaras, they got to move away. So it has to become, but where does it come from? Does it come from a place of gevura, of severity, of harshness? No, it has to come from a place when you're going to admonish somebody, it has to come from a place of chesed. So that's why specifically a kind person, someone connected with chesed, Aaron, Kohanim, they're connected with giving, chesed. Chesed and giving they go hand in hand. The problem with death is the idea of taking. It takes the body away and it leaves a vacuum. And when that vacuum is there, it says ritual impurity, klipa, mavis, death, these impurities, they're not bad, by the way. They're just different. They fill that vacuum, and Kohanim can't be associated with taking. They're always associated with giving. That's part of the reason why they're not in business, because there's a lot of taking and giving. Now, that's kind of a bummer in a way. You might think, oh, Kohanim, they're so lucky. They get to be, so associated with kindness and giving and holiness, But Torah says the greatest mitzvah you could possibly do for somebody is to bury them. And a Kohen is not allowed to bury anybody. It's considered the greatest mitzvah. Why? Because you will for sure not have any reward in return. You're doing it purely lishma, for the right reason. The person themselves can never repay you for that. And a Kohen can never take part in that unless there's nobody else to do it. It says over here, Rashi says, when you speak to the Kohanim, so the parsha says, when you, in the beginning, speak to Aaron and his children and everybody, and and say to them, these are the laws of a Kohen. That is that's a statement that says, so we explain that means don't just speak to adults, we have to speak to children, because it says the word speak twice, and it says lihizahir. You should warn them. You should warn them about, getting ritually impure, and warn them about certain things they have to stay away from. But lizar doesn't just mean warn. Lizar also comes from the word zohar, which means to brighten, to enlighten. And the Talmud brings down that, I don't know if it's the Talmud, certainly tradition brings down that when you're teaching, how do you educate somebody? What's the proper way to educate children? It's not enough just to give knowledge and information. Now, I did have great teachers, I'll tell you. I've had some really great educators, and they really did get me excited. And in those classes, I did the best, for sure. Yeah, what's the saying? People don't care what you know until they know that you care. The teachers that ultimately did the best were the ones that actually, I felt, cared about what they had to say, cared about the student understanding it, and worked with you, as opposed to those teachers that just gave knowledge, clocked out, and walked away. They had very little impact on my life. And there's plenty of teachers like that till today. But that's not called education. That's just called imparting knowledge. So you have to educate. And the way to educate is that you have to get the child excited. There should be an emotional excitement in what they learn. And how do you do that? What's the best way to do it? That you yourself are excited about the topic. You yourself are excited about the information. And more than that, you embody that information. I had one of my quizzes, because I saw it in the Kuzari from Pirkei Avos. It says, the Mishnah asks, what's greater, to learn from books or to learn from sages, or learn from a teacher? And the Kuzari says it's better to learn from a teacher, because you see it in real time. You actually see, you put it into practice, and especially if someone is excited about it, that excitement gets imparted to the student, and then it sticks with them much more. Helps with memory. So it's always, that's what you gotta be excited about what you want to do. The rabbi at this part, Rabbi Silberg, whenever he teaches this parsha, he speaks about educating children. And one of the big things that we do as frum people, let's say you have a light on Shabbos and you want that light turned off. So there's very complicated laws, and getting a non-Jew, it's called Amir La'akum, telling a non-Jew to turn it on or turn it off. It's very complicated, and most of the time you can't do it. So what do? What you do is you take your child who's 3 years old or 4 years old or 2 years old, and hopefully they're old enough to be able to switch off the light switch or whatever. You hold them up right next to the light switch, and you point to the light switch, and hopefully they knock it off. So the child is not halakhically, you don't have to, at that age, at 2 years old, you can't really train a child to appreciate Shabbos yet. It's just the reality, unless they have the maturity. But most of them at 2, 1.5, 2 you can tell them muksa, it's muksa, you can't touch that, can't play with that. They have no idea what you're saying, and they don't understand Shabbos. Shabbos to them is any other day of the week. Once they do start recognizing that it is Shabbos, so there is some sort of something's different today than any other day, then you're not allowed to do such things. However, up to that point, you really can, because they're not held liable, and the Torah doesn't seem to say any blemishes will happen to there's no blemish, no soulful blemish. So that's like classic thing that we do. The rabbi's kind of against it though. We shouldn't really do that, but whatever. Desperate times call for desperate measures. Usually it's about the age of 3, 2.5. It's really about the age of 2.5 that you can't ask your child to do. Now you can't really even ask, can't hint in any way to like break Shabbos for you, to do something to make your life more convenient on Shabbos. I know that might sound shocking, perhaps to some of you, but it's extremely prevalent. So Kohanim can't fly over cemeteries. They're buried on the outside of the cemeteries, we explain. So what about doctors? Are there Kohanim doctors? So there are Kohanim doctors. However, it is very problematic. It is problematic to be a doctor, a Kohen, and a doctor. Of course there are. What about if they have to work on cadavers? So in Israel, they have virtual cadavers, right? Virtual fake dead bodies, and they work through that. Did you find that kind of interesting? Something kind of controversial is that a Kohen cannot have any deformities. And the Gemara, the Chumash lists a few, or the Torah lists a few, I don't know, 7, 8, 10 deformities that a Kohen it makes him puzzle, invalid to serve in the Beis HaMikdash. That's seemingly kind of harsh. But the reason really it's to protect the Kohen. In other words, number one, they wanted the Kohen to be revered, a revered position, and they don't want it to be pitied. Kohanim, for the most part, that served in the Beis HaMikdash, they were extremely handsome men. They were very handsome, very beautiful to look at. Those are the ones that basically had the big jobs. Okay, it is what it is. And the reason why is because they didn't want people to look at them and feel pitied. There's a certain reverence for the position, much like FDR didn't. He had a photographer, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, our president during the Second World War and Depression, late part of the Depression. He was paralyzed from the waist down, right? He had polio. He was paralyzed from the waist down, and he would never allow the photographer to take a photo of him below the waist. And whenever he stood up, he had his 2 children. They had it in a way that, it didn't look like he was being held by his children, but he really was. Because he wanted, there's certain reverence for the position. And that's the same thing by the Kohen. But the truth is, we didn't want to put any spotlight on their, we don't want anybody to judge them. Like, we don't want, what happens is a person comes up with a certain deformity and serving the Beis HaMikdash, they were very watched. Everybody watched what they would do. That's on Yom Kippur, when we go to what do we do on Yom Kippur? If you're a Yisrael, you're any other kind of tribe, you were standing outside the Beis HaMikdash watching the whole show going on and praying and bowing, but you were watching what was going on. But they didn't want people to become like too fixated on something, it's not nice to stare. So they didn't want to draw any attention in that way. Now, the Kohanim, they would do other works in the Beis HaMikdash. They just didn't serve in the more public parts of it. There was plenty to do. There was a whole underworld going on in the Beis HaMikdash. I don't know if you guys know that. That's where the Kohen Gadol slept. He slept down below. But the checking of the wood and flour and there was a lot of agricultural things that needed to be done. There was a lot of selling and buying and selling for the animals for the temple. So there was a lot of work to be done, and those were the positions that would be given to certainly honorable positions. I couldn't do those positions as a Yisrael or even as a Levite. You couldn't do those positions. It was only given to a Kohen, and that was the Kohen That was a position. It is what it is. The animals as well, we're not allowed to have any sort of deformity or any blemish. It's called tamim. Yeah, you gotta be, it's pure. It says, some of them, the animals couldn't have any broken bones. The Torah says they can't be blind. They can't have any warts. And one of the things is their testicles cannot be smashed. It's one of the things. Machua. Their testicles couldn't be smashed. And Rashi says this is one of the places where you're not allowed to neuter your animals. You cannot spade or neuter your animals according to the Torah. Now, I grew up with a German Shepherd. I love animals and I love dogs, and so I'm not here to. Sorry, Bob Barker, who at the end of every show would say, "Don't forget to spade or neuter your animals. Help keep the pet population down. Please spade or neuter your animals." And he got a big award for that. Totally get where he's coming from, and especially if you've been to Israel and you see the number of cats walking around Jerusalem, it's quite disgusting and disturbing. It's not disturbing; it's just gross. Nevertheless, we're not allowed to do that. You can't spade or neuter your animals. It says, going on about animals, in chapter 22, it continues. It says, if you want to have veal cutlets, if you want to have, or lamb chops, you want to have, animals from, you want to eat chicken drummets, you want to eat food from a baby animal, the animal, so in a calf, I don't know what's the appropriate term for a little chicken. Chick? No, but like it's got to be, I guess a chick, whatever. Chicks grow very fast, don't they? Bella, you would know. How long does it take from a chick to become like a full-grown chicken? It takes like a week and a half. What is it?
No, it depends on the breed, but like meat varieties, I think it's like 12 or 16 weeks. It's pretty fast. I have 6 baby chickens growing up in my house right now, and they just are getting their feathers, and they're probably a little over around a month old.
Okay. So again, not as fast as I thought. In my own mind, there goes back to that time what Ari was talking about. Yeah, so it is pretty fast, but you have to at least have an animal before you shecht it, before you eat it. You want to have veal chops or lamb chops, whatever it is. It has to experience at least one Shabbos. You got to wait 7 days. You got to wait 7 days, and which means you'll guarantee a Shabbos. And the reason is, it's the same reason why we don't give a bris, or more a Kabbalistic reason why we don't give a bris to a baby boy until he is 8 days old, because we need him to experience a Shabbos, because the Shabbos will elevate the animal or the child. Same thing. No, you need that Shabbos to be able to elevate that animal. Only then can it be all that energy will be elevated, and only then could you. In other words, we want the neshama. Every animal, everything has a neshama, right? Everything. The neshama, there's a certain stage where the neshama enters the body after a Shabbos. And once it experiences a Shabbos, a certain neshama that enters the body. Now we want that neshama part of us, so to speak. In other words, that's what we need to elevate. We're trying to extract that when we eat food properly. We're trying to extract all those spiritual elements, or the godly elements, I should say, and elevate them. Everything wants to go beyond itself. So an animal, the way an animal goes beyond itself, rises above itself, is by being consumed by a human. And then the human acting godly, we become connected with God, especially if we're learning Tanya lately, by connecting our mind and our actions with God, God's minds and actions. We become elevated, and that's how the animal, so to speak, gets elevated up, proper carbon. So we needed to experience that first Shabbos. There's something I wanted to say. I don't really remember. Okay. Chapter 22, verse 22 says, Don't desecrate my name, and you should sanctify my name. How do we sanctify God's name? So Rashi explains that's by dying al kiddush Hashem. That we die for the purpose of people kill us, or we die because we're trying to sanctify God's name. We're doing it as a representative of God. And the Gemara says this actually is referring to a davar shebekdusha, by doing anything holy, namely davening with a minyan, praying within a minyan. That you want. When we say that God's name will be sanctified? The Talmud says that's by inviting the Shekhinah, the divine presence, The divine presence should rest. When the divine presence rests in our world, parenthetical over here, it's actually any world, any place where God rests. It's called the Shekhinah. So in our worlds, typically when we say the Shekhinah, the colloquial term, when we say Shekhinah, we're meaning God should rest in this world. When does God rest in this world? It says when you daven with a minyan, when there's 10 men present. So you need 10 Jewish souls, and that sanctifies God's name. We also have this concept as Beroiv Am Hadras Melech, which everyone's familiar of, that through the multitudes, God says, I am beautified, which means you should always do things in a communal manner, which I find to be probably the most attractive thing about Judaism, is its focal point, or its focus on community. And it really is. Obviously, it's focus on family, and it's focus on learning. But really, I think it's the fraternity and sorority, which that's not limited to Judaism. That's any cult. It's like, anything, any religion, really, the more orthodox or the more traditional a group is, the more, so there's more fraternity, more sorority, and there's more camaraderie and community, and which is what I think most of us, which you don't really have in the secular world. Let's be honest. It's all about leave me alone. You do you, I do me, and I'll vote whatever keeps you away from me and I from you. I'll say I'm all for the people, but I don't want to get involved. But you think that, but you don't really want that. You just don't realize that you really want to be part of a community, and you really want you want a sense of community, sense of sorority, a sense of fraternity. Anyway, and that God calls that holy. When you get together, al tifresh min hatzibur. Yeah, we read in last week's Pirkei Avos. Do not separate yourself from the community, which means intentionally. Don't intentionally try to do things. What's it called? Jack Kerouac. What's it called? Opposite. What is it? When you go against the grain. Whatever. Don't be like a rebel without a cause type of thing. Don't intentionally try to remove yourself from the community and do things that remove yourself from the community. That is not a bad thing. Okay, there are some times you're like, this is not for me, or this is inappropriate, or I'm just not ready for this, to do this, whatever we want to do. I don't know. And whatever a community wants to get together and do a certain event, like, okay, you don't have to go to every event. You don't have to dance at every wedding. You don't, but to make like that's your thing, I go against the grain, that's what I do always. Okay, that's a problem. And you're going to be a very unhappy person. Just that Torah doesn't say that. I add that. Okay, the Torah, the Parsha then goes on and speaks about holidays. Interesting thing about holidays. Holidays are called Shabbos. They have this, the day of rest, but they also have this, obviously, this level of Kedusha. I'm not going to get so much into this. I don't really. But I will talk about this because it's connected with what's going on today. Verse 15, it says, Shabbos, from the day after Shabbos, you shall bring the Omer offering, and you shall count 50 days. What is that referring to? Sfiras HaOmer, what we're in the middle of right now. And this is a big debate between the Sadducees, the Tzaddikim. When I say Sadducees, I have to add, as Rabbi Silberg used to say, they're sad, you see. Yeah, the Sadducees, they would sit in the dark. They didn't accept the oral tradition. What does that mean, by the way? They didn't accept the oral tradition. Who are the Sadducees? So the early Sadducees were like this. Until about 1,500 years ago, there was no Talmud, there was no Gemara, there was no book of the oral tradition. Everybody would go to an academy, and you had your teacher that you liked, that you would go to and you would listen to, and he would open up the Torah. There was only the 5 books of Moses. That's all there was. And he would say, like, okay, over here it says you shouldn't light a fire on Shabbos. What that means is you can't light a fire on Shabbos. That's what it means. And then he goes, that's my tradition. Then you'll have another rabbi from another academy who'll say, no, I have a tradition dating back from when Moses taught us the Torah that says you can't even light from one flame to another. Yeah, you can't even light from an existing flame. Don't make a fire. You might just think, like, don't strike a match. So that may be one person's opinion. That was his tradition. Another person's tradition is like, no, you can't even, if there's already an existing flame, you can't take that flame and then go take a candle and go light another candle with it. You can't even do that. So there would be like these different opinions and traditions, because I guess through time, as time went on, people had to move around. There was like, certain calamities that would happen, and people forgot tradition. That's just how it was. Broken telephone. But everybody would go to the academy and they would write notes down. Yeah, you were allowed to go. When we say you weren't allowed to write down the oral tradition, it means you were not allowed to write it in a book, like the entire oral tradition. I don't even know how that would be possible. But what you could do was you could go listen to a lecture, which is what it was, and you can write your own notes. What happened was Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Yehuda the Prince, commissioned 1,000, whatever it was, 100, 1,000 rabbis, much like Art Scroll. Art Scroll is not written by one person; it's written by 100 people. And they had this one gvir, this one wealthy person. In this case, on Art Scroll, it was Schottenstein from Ohio, very wealthy family. They own American Eagle, amongst other things. They paid for a bunch of rabbis to sit down and compile and translate and compile and make a systematic way of understanding oral tradition, because the mind, people couldn't handle all that information. We saw that there was there were fewer and fewer rabbanim that could handle all that information. It actually starts before then. I apologize. It actually starts with Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai. After the destruction of the Second Temple, he created the canon of Torah. Yeah, the 24 books of Moses, 24 books of the Tanakh, that existed that only started by Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai. There were millions of prophets. The Jewish people had millions of prophets. You can go to prophecy school and become a prophet. You really could. But which prophecies were really those that should be? People wrote them down. They wrote down their understandings of the prophecies. Yeah, Yechezkel, Ezekiel maybe wrote down his prophecy, and he said it. But with time, people forgot it, and everybody had their own way of writing it down and trying to remember it. So Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai said, "Okay, we're going to clear all that up. There's going to be I'm going to tell you, together with all the other sages, the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, the men of the Great Assembly, super geniuses, Ruach HaKodesh, real prophecy. We're going to tell you which ones fit into the canon, which ones are actually part of the should be part of the Jewish Bible forever. Meaning they have lessons not just for now, but they always have lessons for eternity, and they get us closer to Hashem, etc., etc." So he did that. He compiled them, and he wrote down, him and his peers told us how to daven, how to properly pray, what Shabbos is all about, what Yom Tov is all about, what are the really important parts of the Torah, what should be written down and can never be changed. And there was a whole debate whether, Shir Shirim, the Song of Songs, should be something that would be part of the canon of Torah. There's a whole great debate about that, interesting debate about that. And eventually, boom, it became the... Everybody accepted that. Now, that had to happen again. That whole idea of what is really part of tradition and what's not part of tradition, what's right and what's wrong, what is really... we need one cohesive body of work when it comes to the oral tradition, how to interpret the 24 books of the Tanakh, how to read the 24 books of the Tanakh. There was a bunch of different, everybody had their own interpretation, everybody had their own letters, their own notes, etc., etc. So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Rabbi Yehuda the Prince, extremely wealthy, the leader of the Jewish people, he said, okay, now we need to compile something. We need to compile the Mishnah, the oral tradition, in a way that, in note form, that would still lead to discussion, but very concise. We have to make very concise and complete oral tradition. What we have now is we don't even know how much. There's a lot more to the oral tradition. It just got lost over time because things couldn't get printed. There was no printing press back then. So it was still written down. People were still getting killed and moved around, and papers got lost and fires. So we don't even have the entire oral tradition the way it was by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, but we have, I don't even know if we have a good amount. Whatever, we have what we have. The Rabbi Yehuda Nasi commissioned the oral tradition. Now, he started writing it down. But what did he use? What did they use? They used to compile it. They used people's notes, students and teachers, and they recorded conversations, and they compiled it down. The Sadducees, the Tzaddikim, said Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and his peers were the ones that decided what is the oral tradition. and what is going to be included in oral tradition. And they decided, the Sadducim, the Sadducees, rejected it. And they said, who are you? It's like a pretty good argument. It's not so far-fetched what they did. Who are you? What do you mean? Why is this enough? I have a tradition that's different. Kitniot is not a problem. Why you're deciding Kitniot is a problem? I never heard that from Moses. I never had a tradition in my family to say Kitniot was a problem. And you're coming on and telling me Kitniot is a problem? So they did away with anything.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure.
I hate to interrupt you because you're on a roll, but didn't the Kitniot issue come much later?
Oh yeah. No, 1,000 years later. Yeah. The Sephardim never even heard of such a thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was just an example. I can't think of a better example. So
you know what's a good one?
Oh, how do you put on tefillin? Like, what does it actually look like? What does it mean?
Like mamash.
It would put it mamash between their eyes.
Yeah.
First of all, how do they even know it was black, or what was written inside of it? But yeah, that's a good one. Okay, that's a good example. Where do you put tefillin? Tefillin says, so I'll give you an example over here. I'll give you an example. The example is, it says about the Omer offering, you should bring it the day, it says you should bring it after Shabbos. So it talks about Passover, and then it moves, right? We say all the Yom Tivs, and then right after that, it says you should bring the Omer offering the following Shabbos. So what does that mean? What do you think that means? From a simple reading of the text, it just means once Passover is done, you wait a Shabbos, and then you bring the Omer offering, this barley offering, you put it into the Mizbeach, you put it onto the altar, then you count 50 days, and then it'll be Shavuos. But that's not. The tradition is, the oral tradition, the way Rabbi Yonasi wrote it down, is that, what does it say the day after Shabbos? It means the day after the first day of Pesach. That means you have the first day of Pesach, and then we start counting the Omer. You start counting 49 days. And they said, what are you talking about? We don't have that tradition. And I don't even know what you're talking. You just made, where does that come from? It says it clearly in the Torah that you have to wait a whole Shabbos after Passover. And once that, so what comes out, Shavuos will always be on a Sunday. That's what it ends up being. Shavuos will always fall on a Sunday. So according to Sadducees, it always fell on a Sunday. And but no, our tradition, and Rabbi Hanasi and his colleagues, they said no. The tradition is that we got from Moses. Moses told us that it doesn't mean literally Shabbos. It means the Shabbos, meaning the Yom Tiv of the first day of Pesach. Right? Pesach back then was only one day. We lived in Israel. It was only one day. So after that Shabbos, that Yom Tiv, that Pesach, then we start counting 49 days. So that's why, so whatever. I felt like I had to tell you a little bit about the Sadducees, and there's a lot more to it, which is fascinating and awesome. Just to say something, just to conclude over here about Shavuos. So you count 49 days. On the 50th day, it is Shavuos. We have a tradition that we don't count the 50th day. The 50th day, Hashem counts for us, and that's Shavuos. What if you fly from Australia to New York during this period of time? Very problematic to do such a thing. You're really not supposed to do that. Why? Because if you fly from Australia to Los Angeles, you're losing a day. And you have to count 49 days, and then it's Shavuos. Once you count 49 days, then it's Shavuos. Shavuos is not a specific day, it's the 50th day from the counting. So what if the people do it? So the best thing to do is, and I'll tell you why it's very practical. It happens a lot because everybody in North America, every yeshiva goes on break during Passover. So, my roommates were from Australia, South Africa, South America. They were from all over the place. So everyone flies back home for the most part. They fly back home. Then yeshiva starts back up after Passover. So how do you fly back from yeshiva? How do you fly back from your home to yeshiva in New York? So the best way to do it is you actually fly the long way. So if you live in Australia, the best way to do it is you fly the long way. You don't want to go over, I'm sorry, the Kav HaTerech is the international dateline. You don't want to fly over the international dateline, because if you do that, you lose a day. So what they do is they fly to India, to England, to New York, whatever. That's how, that's typically how it's done. But there are plenty of people, it's very expensive to do that way. So there are plenty of people that actually just fly over, right? Fly over the international dateline. What do they do? So most of the Jewish world will still, I believe they still celebrate Shavuos with everybody else. Even though they didn't really count, they just lost a day. They lost a day because They say
this is like the time dilation thing.
yeah,
where
this is
it's
time
like,
dilation. Yeah, totally. Exactly.
yeah.
It all the beginning is wedged in the end, right? This is like what we spoke about in the beginning is now coming to the conclusion, and it goes right back to the beginning. They lost the day because the counting is not an individual person. It's not in the individual account. It's the Jewish people counting as a whole. So if the Jewish people count wherever you are in New York City, and they counted 49 days, that's where you are. That's the place that you're in. You celebrate Shavuos with them. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, I believe, is the only one who holds no. Counting of the Omer is an individual thing. Spartam lachem, for you as an individual will count the Omer, and therefore those that fly over the international dateline, if you are a Lubavitcher, you very often will be celebrating 3 days of Shavuos because you'll be doing the 2 days together with. No, you won't necessarily be counting 2 days. You still do 2 days. It's just you might be starting it on a different day than everybody else. You'll be starting it a day later, right? You'll be starting it a day. So while our day number 3 for us, so Shavuos is 2 days. Say it's Monday, Tuesday. On Wednesday, it's a free day. For you, Wednesday is the second day of Shavuos. Now, it's also problematic because the first day you're not allowed to just do whatever you want. You can't keep, you got to keep that first day of Yom Tov as well because everyone's keeping Yom Tov that day. You're in a place where everyone keeps Yom Tov. So they end up keeping Yom Tov Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. It's very complicated. But so there's actually a minyan in the Rebbe's shul in 770 in New York. It's in the back. I've seen it on a Wednesday. When you're just like driving your car and doing whatever, talking on the cell phone, they're making Kiddush and reading the Torah, and it's kind of interesting. Okay, that's all I got for the roundup. I gotta go. Anybody have any questions? You're like, I don't even know what happened. Just kidding. Okay, awesome.
I do have a quick comment though about the Shabbat thing. When you start counting, I learned that the Shabbat Hagadol is called Shabbat Hagadol because in that week there's actually 2 Shabbatot, and then the Rabbanim had to make a distinction between the real Shabbat and then the extra Shabbat. So the extra Shabbat is Pesach, but like the real Shabbat, which is Shabbat Hagadol, is just like Saturday.
Oh yeah,
You know
I
what
think
mean?
I've heard that before. Yeah,
So they called it Shabbat Hagadol to say like, no, this is the real normal Shabbat, and then as an aside thing, there's Pesach, which is Shabbat.
Very nice, beautiful. Yeah, okay. I think I've heard that before. Very nice. Very good. Okay, with that, I wish you all. So tonight there's like a questions and answers. I think it's going to happen. There's like a Q&A. Bring your questions about the parsha, any parsha really, but specifically about this one. If you have any questions, you say them, you can ask them, and they'll be answered, not by me, but by somebody else. Okay, everybody enjoy the rest of the day. Peace.
Zakbaruk.
See you.